Hello everyone, I'm here to tell you that Necromancers are super good in this patch. I would actually slot them right up at the top with Weapon Masters, Frost Whisperers, Arcane Scholars, and Blade Masters in terms of competitive DPS. One of their skills, Life Feedback, now gives you a percentage-based damage buff instead of a lower set value, which actually makes for a tremendous damage increase. And the coolest thing about Necromancers is that now they no longer have to worry about running out of mana because Drain Life, one of their abilities, now restores mana, making it so that Necromancers can now spam their abilities, and because of this they can now more reliably proc Force Release, which of course is an ability that gives you a significant damage boost as long as your mana is over 90%, which again now is basically all the time. Many Necromancers have actually come up to me and told me that their class feels super broken at the current state of the game, and I mean broken of course in the best sense of the word, but if you've been considering making the swap to Necromancer, let me just tell you, now's the time to do it. Today, I'm bringing you a detailed Necromancer guide that will surely have you crushing it on the damage meters. I want to start off by thanking my friend ChaosAngel for letting me on his account to show you his build. ChaosAngel is one of the best Necromancers on the entire server, and he's incredibly active in terms of constantly studying this class to make sure that he is squeezing out every possible bit of damage at all times. Just for reference, ChaosAngel is the number 7 Necromancer on our server Scarabear S1, and frankly I feel too powerful playing this account as is, so I can't even imagine what it would be like to play one of those top accounts. Just so you know, all of this information comes directly from ChaosAngel, so with this guide you'll be getting the best information from somebody who actually plays this class every single day. For those of you that don't know, the primary role of a Necromancer is a single target DPS caster that relies heavily on dots or damage over time abilities. In PvE, this class stands at a distance and gets all of its damage from constantly applying these damage over time abilities to their target. They are not a burst damage class by any means, but if you understand the skill rotation priority, use the correct engravings on your skills, and just mess with the haste a little bit, you'll be well on your way to seeing yourself at the top of those damage meters every single boss fight. In PvP, however, this class tends to struggle in small scale PvP such as, let's say, 3v3s and 5v5s, but in really small scale PvP like 1v1 and 2v2, and in large scale PvP, it's actually amazing. And that's because of their sustain and survivability skills. When they have less targets, they can really use their kit to just self-heal and kind of manage certain damage situations well, and just come out on top pretty much the majority of the time. Maybe with the exception of facing a rogue, but honestly, who wins those fights anyways other than battle mages? In large-scale PvP, the Necromancer does well if it stays in the very back where no one can touch him, and let me just say, a free casting Necromancer is a terrifying thing for sure. In PvP, their hardest hitting dot spell, Shadow of Doom, which we'll go over a bit later, does something crazy now. If somebody tries to dispel it from themselves, it will detonate and deal 600% damage to the target and stun them for 2 seconds. So this is particularly useful in, let's say, large scale and small scale PvP for the specific purpose of shutting down bards. If you don't know, bards have a pretty spammable dispel skill, and if they aren't careful, they can easily be made into Necromancer food. Sorry, bard mains. Before we get into the actual specifics of the stats and everything, I want to show you what the kit looks like, just so that you can kind of be familiar with what you're getting with this Necromancer. So first I want to show you the auto attack Shadow Bolt. It's actually a pretty high damaging ability, but it's just going to be used as a filler for your rotation, which again we'll go over a bit later. The next ability, let's start on the bottom here. Drain Life is going to be a channeled cast ability which deals damage to your target and it heals you and restores some of your mana. This is part of the reason why Force Release pretty much is up all the time. Next up is going to be a damage over time ability called Plaguing Curse. It's a short cast ability, it activates your mana torrent, and this is something that's going to play an integral role to your rotation, so pretty much you're going to be using it every time it's up, but that's just what it looks like there. Moving up again, we have Miasma, which is going to kind of do just crappy damage. Honestly, the damage isn't good. It's an instant cast ability. It looks like that, creates a small green area effect around your target, and it's just really not a good ability. But when we start talking about the tier pieces and certain effects that this ability gives you, it is going to be worked into your rotation to give you a damage boost, again, which we'll go over in just a moment. Next up, we have Banshee's Wail. Now, Banshee's Wail is a CC ability, so it looks like this, and everyone around you is disoriented and confused for 6 seconds. But this is also something you need to pay attention to. Look at the bottom. If the target that you're attacking is permanently immune to crowd control effects, which is all bosses, then it will increase your damage to them by 15% for 10 seconds. The theme about this class, obviously what you can see so far, is that you're basically going to be running up to stuff, using abilities that increase your damage, and then dropping damage over time abilities on your target. In the upper right hand corner we have Fade to Miss, which is a really good escape ability. It just makes you go immune to damage. You fade into the mist here and you actually heal up to 6 targets around you, so it makes you go immune, you can run away, and it heals people around you. This is a great escape ability, honestly just fantastic. To the left of Plaguing Curse we have Life Feedback. This is going to be your main buff that you want to have up at all times. Basically what it does is it takes away your HP and gives you mana, so it keeps your mana pretty much up all the time, and it gives you a damage boost. People don't really know this, but before the 2.0 patch, this ability gave you a set number of damage that you would do as an increased amount, and it just wasn't that much. But now it is percentage based, and it gives you 10% damage bonus for 22 seconds. You want to have this up at all times, and it just looks like this. The most important ability in your entire kit is going to be this red ability here called Shadow of Doom. This is where the majority of your damage comes from, and you need to cast it the second that it comes up, every single second that you see it. And just so you know, if you look in the upper left hand corner, those green runes are what are needed to cast it, and the more you have of those, the more damage that your Shadow of Doom does. However, a mistake that kind of newer players make is that they think that you need to have full shards up there in the upper left hand corner in order to cast it to get the most out of it, and that's simply not the case. You do not want to wait to have maximum shards to cast Shadow of Doom. And I'm just auto attacking here so I can show you, if you cast Shadow of Doom and then continue your rotation again, which I'll explain later, whenever Shadow of Doom comes up again and I use it, there are 2 stacks of Shadow of Doom on the target up at the top. You saw it for a brief second. That is where the majority of your kind of padding the damage meters is going to come from, is when you have that 1 or 2 second of overlap time in between your Shadow of Dooms ticking at the same time, doing massive damage to your target. That's what's going to make your DPS just skyrocket. And lastly, we have the ultimate ability on the bottom here called Lichborn, which transforms you into just a vampire, and it increases the damage that you do, it increases your resistances, it heals you, and it's just a crazy ability that also resets the cooldown on your Banshee's Wail, which again is a damage increase. So we'll explain how that works in and how all these are supposed to fit together later, but I just wanted you to get a visual representation of exactly what this class's abilities look like before I start explaining them to you. Taking a look at the skills, the first thing I want to do is explain the passive Dark Harvest. Now, Dark Harvest makes it so whenever you deal damage to an enemy, it gives you a shield, which is stackable, and it just ends up being pretty helpful. Also, you deal 30% extra damage to targets below 35% health, and whenever you use your Drain Life, it gives you one of those Chaos Shards, which increases your damage on certain abilities that you have. Now, the reason why this is a pretty good passive is it actually turns you kind of into a pseudo execute destruction machine whenever the boss fight kind of lingers towards the end. You're really going to see the Necromancers rise in their damage on the charts near the end of fights because of their passive ability that deals increased damage. In terms of the skill leveling priority, I just want to point this out. Again, Shadow of Doom is going to be the highest damage ability in your entire kit, and you want to get that to 9 and even 10 if you can manage that. The second one is going to be actually a toss-up between Drain Life and Life Feedback. And Plaguing Curse. But what you want to do is kind of level Drain Life, Life Feedback, and Plaguing Curse up at the same time. But Life Feedback, the reason why it's so good is because if you level it up, it gives you 1% increased damage for each level. And so at level 9, it's 9%. At level 10, it's 10% increased damage. And that's damage per tick of each one of your abilities. And so really there's a huge value placed on this, but Drain Life and Life Feedback are kind of close. You want to level them both up to level 9 really as soon as you can after Shadow of Doom. But if you put one to 10 and the other to 10, I really don't think it makes that much of a difference. But if it were up to me, I would go with a percentage base damage bonus because of the way that it affects each dot over against the pure damage that would come from Drain Life. Drain Life, again, is a spam filler ability, and you're going to be interrupting it a good portion of the time anyway to make sure that you can cast Shadow of Doom, which again I'll go over when we get to the rotation side. Taking a look at the engravings, something I want to say right at the outset is, because this is a damage over time class, really crit isn't valued so much because damage over time abilities or dot abilities, they don't crit. It's just the initial hit that crits if it does. And so for Drain Life, Siphon is better than crit, because you're going to be increasing your damage and healing by 5% at all times instead of just looking for the revive. So your dots are also going to benefit from that as well. If you're doing PvP, you can go self-healing. This is really good for sustain, but everything else except for PvP, you want to go Siphon. Plaguing Curse is going to be also won over by the Sharp Glyph, and that is because dealing increased damage with one of your main dot abilities at a static rate is going to be incredibly important. And if you're going for PvP, I would suggest using the Cleave as well, because if you're sitting in the back and you're casting this Plaguing Curse, having it on 2 people instead of 1 person is always better. But really Sharp is going to be the best anything outside of PvP, and really Drain Life and Plaguing Curse are the only 2 abilities that have any kind of variation in terms of your engraving. Miasma is just a bad skill right now at the current state with the way that ChaosAngel's gear is. He doesn't have any tier pieces, but he wants to use Sharp. This is just kind of a bad skill, and it's going to be used again later. I'll explain why, but right now he has it at Sharp, but when he gets his tier pieces, he's going to go for Agile to reduce the cooldown again, which I'll explain later. Banshee's Wail, you want to use Agile because the more that this is available, the more damage you're going to do. Remember, if you look at the skill, if your target is immune to crowd control effects, which is every single boss, it increases your damage to them by 15% for 10 seconds. And so you want to use Agile all the way. Who cares if it crits the boss harder? Who cares if it does more damage? All you care about is the byproduct of what Banshee's Wail gives you for 10 seconds, namely that 15% increased damage. Same thing with Fade to Mist. This is just more of a survivability skill, and so having it off of cooldown is more valuable than any of the other options. Life Feedback, however, is something that kind of tends to get overlooked. A lot of people think that you should go with Heal to kind of synergize with your Drain Life and give you more healing, but Drain Life is not really used that much. It's kind of a filler, and oftentimes I end up interrupting it for more important skills to use. But again, I go for the delay engraving here because the beneficial effects of Life Feedback last 2 seconds longer. Again, Life Feedback gives you a 10% damage bonus, as it's going to increase the chances that it's up 100% of the time. Shadow of Doom, again, the most important ability in the entire kit. Go for Agile in terms of the engraving because 2 seconds off of this cooldown is actually pretty significant. Shadow of Doom only has a 6-second cooldown, so reducing the Shadow of Doom by 2 seconds is actually, like, that's insane. Taking a look at the mastery, Painful Torture on the right-hand side is going to be the go-to for both PvP and PvE, again because of its damage bonus to your 2 most damaging abilities. Shadow of Doom and Plaguing Curse deal 13.8% increased damage over time, and Shadow of Doom, which is the big boy, again increases your damage dealt to the target by 10%. So this is just the best in terms of synergy for your class. And again, I would recommend getting the other masteries here leveled up to at least 2.1, and that's because you get 50% of the attribute, namely Spirit, as a byproduct of just having them exist there. Taking a look at the talent tree, he's got a pretty standard spread for a DPS class, 44 Combat Master and 22 Strategist. And let's just begin at the top. You definitely want to go for Bravery because Rage and Mana and Energy doesn't matter. You want to take damage 10 times out of 10 there. Now, the most important thing for this class is Mana Torrent and Force Release, because this class deals primarily damage over time. The more damage that those dots are doing, the better. And Mana Torrent and Force Release increase your damage percentage, so definitely go with Mana Torrent here. Next up is Chanting. Because you're a caster, you want to go Casting Speed. It's going to help you get your dots out quicker, and Force Release again that I just mentioned. Now, I kind of need to explain this here a little bit. Now, I've already said that crit kind of takes a back seat to any other stat for the Necromancer because it is a damage over time class. And again, damage over time abilities do initial damage, which have the option to crit, but every tick for their dot damage does not crit. Dots don't crit. And so really, it's not that valuable. However, when you get to this portion, you need to think to yourself, which one is going to be more important? Having the initial hit from your damage over time ability crit, or have the initial hit from that damage over time ability deal increased crit damage? I would say you want to increase your chances of critting in the first place, and when you crit, you want to just be happy with that damage and not try to bolster it with crit damage. If you were a class like a Frost Whisper who crits all the time with every skill that you cast, then of course Sawblade would take a priority. But because again we're a dot class, we favor crit rate because we would rather the initial hit crit rather than waste a saw blade waiting for these dots to tick and deal crit damage when they don't do that in the first place. It's just useless, and this is the best way to go. Next up, we have Ruthlessness. This is a really good stat, again, because the passive for this class enables it to do increased damage to targets below 35% health. It's kind of just that much more and that much further bolsters your damage to those things. Next up is Resistance Penetration, or Spell Penetration is what it's called. This is a very, 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 very important thing to note. And I just want to show you this to illustrate this. If you click on Character, go to Advanced, and go to RP, or Resistance Penetration, your attacks will ignore a certain portion of target's resistance. If you look at Resistance, it just reduces the magical damage that you take. So with this resistance, I take 32% less magical damage from level 70 targets or other players. So that means that the more resistance you have, the less damage that you're taking from every single dot tick, the less damage you're taking from every single skill. And so if you look at Resistance Penetration, you have a 3% increased chance, kind of a 3% offset to just completely ignore that. So you're doing more base damage with your initial hit and with every single tick of your dot ability. So Resistance Penetration is an incredibly valuable stat when it comes to damage over time classes, and pretty much other classes that deal magic damage as well. And lastly, here we have Desperate Strike. This is just a very, very good skill. It makes you take 10% more damage, but increases your damage done overall by 5% at level 1, and then it just goes up by 2.5% each level, but it does not make you take more damage, and so Desperate Strike is going to be tier 1 later on when we have more access to more artifacts. For the Strategist tree, the first is going to be hit rate. Of course, you want to get that to 103 so that you're hitting all of your targets, that being your PvP targets and your boss monsters. The next one is kind of debatable. Unyielding Will for PvP and PvE is really good, but honestly, a lot of people, especially for PvE, are taking Readiness because it just is kind of a get out of jail free card. And with this class that you're playing now, that 1 second of a crowd control immunity is gonna, if that grants you the ability to cast another dot before you get stunned or before you transition to a new phase, it's gonna tremendously increase your damage. So having this up as a free get out of jail free card to cast another dot, that last dot or maybe that last Shadow of Doom, is tremendously important. Precision is important. In PvP, it's going to make sure you land all your hits so that people aren't parrying or blocking your skills, so that's important. And then lastly, for PvE, you can really go one of two ways with this. Tactical Plan, if you want to min-max on your damage. The only thing is, Tactical Plan is only activated when you use your roll or your flash military skill, so it's kind of useless, to be honest with you. And you get more stats from Field Doctor, and this is going to be your go-to for PvP as well, because this is a haste class. You're primarily building haste. Your resilience rating is going to go way up, and it's going to make the actual rating of your character go up as well, because you're building a lot of haste. And so if you're you're into that kind of flashy thing and you want to have a high stat or a high combat power, go ahead and go for Field Doctor. Moving on to the sigils, of course, the red sigils are going to be Spirit. That is your main stat. Just get those as high as possible. On the bottom here, we have haste, and again, you're going to primarily be building into haste, so he just went haste for all of these. When it comes to the middle, Spirit is going to be the most important thing, so you want to go for Spirit for all of these, and you can kind of fudge around depending on what you need for haste, and if you want to kind of mess around with crit rate, if you think you have enough, then you can mess around with that. But this is a really, really good standard build to go with, and I wouldn't recommend changing this, at least for a long time. Looking at the gear for the Necromancer, really the only mandatory item is going to be the legendary weapon, the Draclaw, at least at phase 3. This is just an incredible weapon because this class primarily depends upon haste. If you know from my past Frost Whisper guide, you'll know that when you equip this and you attack, it has a chance to grant you a stack of a haste blessing, which increases your haste by 70 for 20 seconds, and it stacks up to 5 times. And I want to demonstrate the importance of this by looking at your character. If you click Advanced, you'll see the haste right now is just under 60%, basically 60%. That's going to be the target that you want to go for, and that is because of what this legendary weapon does. So you'll see I'm at 59.97, and as I begin attacking this boss, beginning my rotation on the boss, this is going to proc those abilities, those stacks on the legendary weapon, and it's going to give me a crazy amount of haste. Now, I'm not doing the exact rotation now. I'm just attacking so that I can get the stacks of that ability up and show you how much haste it actually does give me. And so we're just going to keep attacking here. And as you can see, my haste went from 59.97 to 67.05 while that's active. And it's pretty much active the entire fight insofar as you are attacking the boss and not letting the stack fall off. So that legendary weapon is incredibly important because the more haste you have, the more times that your damage over time dots tick, and in turn the more damage that you do. And when it comes to legacy items, you can see he has 3 of them, and he said the most important one that you should definitely go for is going to be the haste offhand that gives you just a crap ton of haste and actually a really good amount of crit as well. And he also has a few other legacy items that are primarily haste. So he's got the haste earrings, and then he's got the haste necklace. Really, you don't need anything other than the offhand insofar as you're able to reach the haste threshold. Again, that haste threshold, I alluded to it earlier, was going to be 60%. Right when you hit 60% haste, you can invest every other stat and everything else you have into crit. And that's because, of course, at 60% haste, with this legendary weapon especially, once you get those 5 stacks, if you have any more than 60% haste or 65% haste, you're just going to be sitting there auto-attacking the boss in between your skills, and it's going to make your DPS go way down. And so you want to reach about 60% haste with this weapon and just put everything else into crit, and you can kind of mess around with your gear to do so afterwards. I want to take this opportunity now to go over these set pieces. So if you look at the set pieces, I'll just say right at the outset, there's a bit of controversy as to whether or not these are actually helpful to go for, or if you should mix sets. I'll say right now, the tier 1 set really just sucks. It's not good. Miasma is a terrible ability, and reducing the cooldown by 3 seconds and generating more chaos shards really isn't overly helpful. It's just not that good. The tier 2, however, is very good, and the 2 suit namely is just incredible. So for the tier 2 set, the 2 suit, casting Miasma, which is that really bad ability, increases your attack by 7% for 7 seconds. That changes everything. The 5 suit, Plaguing Curse, deals 20% increased total damage, and it grants you chaos shards. That's also very good, but I want to point this out. There is the option to go with 2 pieces from each set. And so if you look here and you want to build around this thing here, casting Miasma increases your attack by 7% for 7 seconds. That's a 7% attack increase, which is a lot. Looking back at the tier 1 piece for Necromancer, Plaguing Curse, which is your main dot ability outside of Doom, it reduces the cooldown of Miasma by 3 seconds. Again, there is an engraving that reduces the cooldown of Miasma by 1.5 seconds. So walk with me, track with me here. If you go Agile and reduce the cooldown on Miasma, and then you go to your skills and you get the tier 1 Necromancer 2 set, every time you use an ability, it's going to reduce the cooldown by 3 seconds. And then you get the tier 2 set. Every time you cast Miasma, it's going to increase your attack by 7%. Basically what that means is that every time you use Miasma, which has a 15-second cooldown now, without any of those modifiers to it, you're going to have 7% increased damage. So if you kind of do that combo, if you get 2 pieces of the tier 1 and 2 pieces of the tier 2, and then get that glyph that reduces the cooldown on Miasma, Miasma is going to be an integral part of your rotation, and I can't wait for ChaosAngel to test that. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what you should be looking out for in terms of set pieces. Go for definitely 2 tier 1 pieces and wear those, and then go for 2 tier 2 pieces and wear those. And then you can just slowly work your way up, getting the rest of the tier 2 pieces to see if having a 5-piece tier set of the tier 2 is going to be worth it or not. Now for the pet, it's actually pretty simple. He goes for the puppy agent here, and that is because, of course, it gives you base stats, whatever, crit rate okay, but what we're looking for here is RP, resistance penetration. Remember, the more resistance penetration you have, the more damage every single one of your dots is going to do. And if you're stacking these dots, the more DPS you're going to do. Also, it has a really good buff that gives you 15% increased haste, which I'll show you how to use later. You want to use it during your ultimate, but I'll show you how to use that in just a moment. If you want kind of a simple alternative, really anything that gives you resistance penetration is going to be good, but the haste byproduct isn't going to be killer. And in terms of critical strike chance and crit damage, that's useful, but again, being a class that really doesn't value crit that high because their dots don't crit, this kind of pet really isn't overly necessary. But if you want to have anything, I'd say this is probably the best thing to go for if you're on a budget, but go for the puppy agent, which is going to be a very good pet if you have the means to do so. Moving on to the artifacts, I'll just say here, this is going to be pretty straightforward and pretty simple. The only thing that the Necromancer cares about is Force Release, Mana Torrent, and Desperate Strike. It would be great to get a high spirit roll. It'd be great to get, you know, all of these other things. But honestly, if you get Force Release on the bottom as a +2, Mana Torrent on the bottom as a +2, it doesn't matter what the middle row is. It doesn't matter. You don't need crit as this class. You don't need crit damage as this class. If you got Bravery, that'd be great. That's probably the best case scenario. But if you have Force Release and Mana Torrent, at least on the bottom, that is okay, 100%, 10 times out of 10. You really don't need to struggle and work too hard with these as long as you get those +2s on the bottom. That's the only thing you care about. And then again, Desperate Strike for the later artifacts is going to be the best because it gives you just a raw increase in damage. But as long as you got Mana Torrent and Force Release, you're sitting pretty. Okay, now it's time to talk about the PVE rotation. What I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the overall premise, and then I'll do each skill kind of slowly, one thing at a time, and then I'll put it all together in full speed and slow it down so that you can follow along and study it for yourself. I do want to say that before any engagement, make sure that you have 5 stacks of those shards in the upper left-hand corner, and the way that you get them again is by spamming Drain Life before any boss fight. Drain Life will trigger your Mana Torrent as well as increase the amount of stacks that you have from your legendary weapon. So best case scenario is to be fully loaded before you start a boss fight. But once that's done, let me just explain the premise. So the premise is that you want to begin every single boss fight by using abilities that increase your damage to the boss. And so if you remember again, Banshee's Wail is going to, if you use it on a boss that is immune to crown control, it's going to increase your damage to them by 15%, which is a lot. And then additionally, Miasma is going to increase your damage done by 7% once you have the tier 1 2-piece and the tier 2 2-piece equipped at the same time. That is just going to be very, very useful. Once all of those stars have aligned, so to speak, you want to start with Banshee's Wail, then Miasma, then use your Plaguing Curse, and then Life Feedback, and then just use Shadow of Doom. And then you want to fill it with Drain Life. And then now what you're going to be doing is you're going to be prioritizing your Plaguing Curse, Shadow of Doom, and then filling it in with your Drain Life. So here, I'm just going to be sitting here, you know, using these abilities off of cooldown, making sure that Drain Life is just used as a filler, and it is only taking precedence whenever everything else is off of cooldown. So Drain Life is going to give you back your runes, and as soon as Plaguing Curse goes out, use it. Miasma, then your Shadow of Doom. So the point is to just set up so that your Shadow of Doom does the most damage every time it casts. Now you'll see that there will be circumstances like just then where, let's say I'm casting an ability and then I'm in the middle of a Drain Life and then Shadow of Doom comes up. Again, you want to cast Shadow of Doom as soon as it comes up. So what you can do as a trick is you can use Drain Life, and as soon as it comes up, you can jump to interrupt it and then cast your Shadow of Doom in midair. That's going to be a way to really increase just the damage that you're doing to the boss or whatever you're fighting. And again, just want to point out, look at Shadow of Doom's damage compared to everything else. It is by far the highest damaging ability that you're going to use, and so don't let any other ability skip in front of it by any means. And then basically what you want to do is just keep using Shadow Banshee or Banshee's Wail and Miasma every time they're up to make sure that your damage buffs are up. Use your life feedback every time it's up because it gives you a 10% damage buff, and that's just how it goes. Okay, now it's time to put all of it together in full speed, full time, and I'm going to slow it down again so you can kind of have an easier time studying it and watching it. But first, I just want to explain this. In any other normal fighting scenario, you would want to make sure that you have 5 of those runes stacked up, maxed out in the upper left-hand corner. This is kind of like assume you're just attacking trash before a boss in an Overlord dungeon, or maybe you're going into a boss fight and you're just going to go right in after killing the ads. This is the best case scenario when your legendary weapon has 5 stacks, when Mana Torrent is active, when Force Release is active, and when you're ready to just go straight in. So I'm going to go ahead and right now just perform the entire rotation from beginning to end. Here we go. And we're going to do it on a boss that has lower HP so that you can see really how potent these Necromancers can be near the end phase of a boss fight. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and end it there, and you can see the DPS is really, really high. And I just want to point out, again, look at Shadow of Doom's damage. Look how much damage Shadow of Doom did as compared to all of the other stats and abilities. I mean, that's insane. So Miasma is way down there, Shadowbolt's way down there. Drain Life and Plaguing Curse are kind of going to be competing with one another, but Shadow of Doom, again, by and large, the most damage. And again, pro tip, do not worry about casting your Shadow of Doom whenever you have 5 shards in the upper left. Just cast it as soon as it comes up. Okay, so now that you've seen the whole thing in full time, I'm going to slow it down and explain what I did. You open up again with Banshee's Wail to give you increased damage, and then you cast Miasma to give you increased damage. Then you begin putting dots on the boss by casting Plaguing Curse, and then following that up with the instant cast ability Life Feedback. That'll bring back all of your mana and give you a 10% damage bonus moving forward, you know, to ensure that you have your force release up. Then you're going to cast the big boy Shadow of Doom, and then just fill in the empty space with your Drain Life. And then it just becomes a matter of, you know, understanding the priority that Shadow of Doom is the most important thing. It needs to go out every time it's out. But basically, you're just going to rotate between Drain Life, Shadow of Doom, Plague. Drain Life, Shadow of Doom, Plague, casting all of the other abilities as soon as they're up, except for, of course, Fade to Mist, which you only use defensively. And then when your ultimate ability comes up, it's going to be the same thing. You just wait until your Banshee's Wail is close to being off cooldown. You use Banshee's Wail and attack for 10 seconds, and as soon as that's done, pop your ultimate, pop your pet. Banshee's Wail will be off of cooldown. Use Banshee's Wail again, and then you just continue the normal rotation of Shadow of Doom, Plague, Drain Life, Shadow of Doom, Plague, Drain Life, and then you just fill in as needed. In terms of PvP, the same exact rotation, just sit in the back and do it in the back. You can use Fade to Mist to, you know, if somebody picks you off and you need to get away, just use Fade to Mist to kind of fade into the background so that they can't kill you. I prefer using Fade to Mist when I'm, of course, around my teammates so that they get healed, and then I can fade into them so that the enemies will just get consumed by them. Banshee's Wail takes less of a role in increasing your damage and more of a role in just crowd control. So if you're using, you know, you're going up against a bunch of enemies and you get dived by the back line, let's say you use Fade to Mist to escape, and then you're still getting chased, you can use Banshee's Wail to confuse them and then further escape and run into your team to safety. But other than that, it's pretty much the same rotation. I know that was a lot of information, but honestly, this class is kind of simple. Doesn't have a lot going on, kind of. But, you know, I sat in and I've never played this class before, and I learned how to play it, and within about 5-10 minutes I was a master. So just understand the priorities, understand the situations where you're going to be benefiting from the most damage, and really capitalize on using your Shadow of Doom every single time it's up. And I think you're going to have a really good time with this class, and you're going to enjoy it overall. All right, my friends, that is going to do it for the Necromancer guide. I really did take my time with this one, and I tried my best to give you helpful information that is actually going to teach you about the class. So if you did enjoy the video, please like it, share it with your friends. Also, I'm actually really close to 3,000 subscribers right now, which is pretty surreal for me. So if you have been around since the beginning, please drop a comment down below and let me know that you've been here. But if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and join along for the ride. And until next time, enjoy your day.